Hey, thanks for making it to Veterans Info Tap. I'm glad you made it. Let's talk about the marijuana reclassification. Now, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe, share with a friend, all that good stuff. I really appreciate it. All of that helps to spread the information. So the headline here on military.com is marijuana reclassification unlikely to mean any changes for troops and veterans, at least for now. Let's see what kind of nuggets we can pick up and go from there. So please hit the thumbs up, subscribe, share with a friend, all that good stuff. I truly appreciate it. All right, let's jump into it. President Biden move last month to reclassify marijuana as a less risky and dangerous drug on the federal government's list of controlled substances could mark one of the most significant drug reforms in decades once finalized. But for service members and veterans, nothing will really change. For now, marijuana use remains subject to punishment under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and veterans are still not able to obtain the drug from the Department of Veterans Affairs doctors, despite rapid and widespread legalization of cannabis at the state level. And changing that will be a long road, even after reclassification. Rescheduling would likely not impact members of the military or any different than those outside the military, Peter Carr, a Justice Department spokesman, told military.com. Marijuana will continue to be subject to criminal penalties under federal law, even if marijuana is rescheduled. As marijuana is currently classified as a Schedule I drug, it is deemed as dangerous as heroin or LSD, and therefore seen as highly likely for abuse and offering little benefit to the user. The Biden administration's plan to push it to a Schedule III alongside items such as steroids and testosterone recognizes there's lower likelihood for dependence and possible benefits. To get marijuana fully rescheduled will take time. The draft plan is open for public comment for nearly 2 months, and groups can request a hearing before an administrative law judge. Only after those comments are submitted and any potential hearings held would an administrative law judge recommend a ruling to the Drug Enforcement Administration for a final scheduling decision, Carr told military.com. While the benefits to rescheduling mainly affect research efforts on marijuana, and certain businesses can't claim certain tax benefits due to their product being a Schedule I drug, it does signify a crucial cultural shift at the federal level, in which officials indicate that cannabis isn't as dangerous as their policies have made it out to be since at least 1970. This is monumental, Biden said in a video statement last month. Far too many lives have been upended because of a failed approach to marijuana, and I'm committed to righting those wrongs. You have my word on it. But changing the culture around the Uniform Code of Military Justice and marijuana use within the ranks is a different story. Many of the services have been granting marijuana waivers to recruits for years, and the military has undertaken more progressive reforms in recent years as it struggles with the toughest recruiting environment in decades. The Air Force's newest pilot program, which allows otherwise perfect recruits who test positive for marijuana a chance to retest again and join the ranks, allowed 350 people to join the service from September 22nd, from September 2022 to May 1st of 2024, according to the Air Force Recruiting Service. Earlier this year, the Navy announced it was kicking out recruits who show up to boot camp and test positive for marijuana. Wasn't kicking out. So the Navy announced, and I did a video on this, I think, the Navy announced that it was not kicking out recruits who showed up to boot camp and test positive for marijuana in their system. Last month, a provision included in the House version of the annual defense bill, which could still be cut, would stop marijuana testing altogether for recruits seeking to join the military. But once any civilian fully becomes a service member, marijuana is no longer tolerated. UCMJ Article 112 Alpha details wrongful use and possession of controlled substances and lists by name opium, heroin, cocaine, several others, acid, meth, angel dust, barbiturates, marijuana, and any other of these compounds or derivatives. Furthermore, That same article also specifies any substances listed on a schedule of controlled substances prescribed by the president as well as those listed in the schedules 1 through 5 of the Section 202 of the Controlled Substances Act that would cover marijuana even after planned reclassification, because it's 1 through 5 and they're moving it to a 3, right? So it's still on the list. Rescheduling marijuana may have some positive aspects for businesses and researchers in the civilian world, but nothing changes for those in uniform. The federal government convicts very few individuals on charges of possession and use of marijuana. The vast and overwhelming number of those convictions happen at the state level. Eric Carpenter, an associate professor of law at Florida International University who specializes in military justice, told military.com in an interview that service members are one of the few federally governed groups who are still subject to those types of changes. That's the population that's subject to US or UCMJ, where the rubber meets the road. There's not really going to be any change. So the rest of it is pretty symbolic, Carpenter said. But marijuana use has typically been treated differently from other drugs among the service branches and by some commanders, Carpenter added. Under UCMJ, which is prescribed by Congress as a service member convicted which is prescribed by Congress. A service member convicted of using marijuana could receive a dishonorable discharge, forfeiture of pay, and possible confinement. But Carpenter said it's not uncommon for someone to receive non-judicial punishment instead. It's all stuck inside the same classification within the statute, but they have traditionally been treated differently by commanders, even without Congress taking any action, Carpenter said. The Army, Navy, and Air Force have seemingly loosened up a bit, while the Marine Corps continues to be harsher with its punishment for marijuana use, he said. The other services have already, in some ways, kind of as a norm, sort of reclassified it a bit. They just treat it as much less serious. Veterans who have already turned to using medical marijuana at the state level through their primary care provider will likely not see much change either. Currently, Department of Veterans Affairs doctors can't recommend marijuana, help those former service members obtain it, or prescribe it, and the VA can't pay for it. VA Press Secretary Terrence Hayes told military.com that as it stands now, marijuana is still a Schedule I drug, and VA clinicians still can't prescribe it to veterans. But if rescheduled, it could open the door to further research for medical purposes. President Biden asked the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Attorney General to initiate an administrative review of how marijuana is scheduled under federal law. Hayes told military.com, once the process is complete, VA will consider appropriate next steps, including additional research on the use of marijuana for medical purposes. Hayes added that a veteran's use of marijuana does not impact their ability to access VA health care benefits, and former service members can discuss that drug use with their VA provider. On Tuesday, the House passed an amendment to the VA appropriations bill, which still must go through negotiations, that would allow VA doctors to recommend medical marijuana to veterans in states where the drug has been legalized. Similar efforts have been stricken from the final bill in the past years. Now, wherever you're at on the fence with marijuana, the use of it, and so forth, I think that from a legality standpoint, that makes sense to me. If you're in a state that has it legalized and you can use it for medical purposes, if it's fully legal or just for medical purposes, why wouldn't you allow your VA that operates in that state to be able to do that? I do think that that's the appropriate way. Moving on, Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, a nonprofit veterans organization, joined a chorus of groups praising the rescheduling effort, saying it would ease the stigma around marijuana use for their members. Many veterans already use cannabis to treat their wartime wounds, visible and invisible. They're paying out of pocket to do so, not just because it works, but because we're also the generation that grew up amidst the opioid crisis and are eager for any alternative to pills. Moving on, eventually allowing service members to use marijuana while in uniform is a tall order, especially because of long-standing norms about good order and discipline paired with the fact that they are often utilizing heavy equipment and expensive weapons. Carpenter said it's not likely that change will come easily within the military. There's one last quotation. There's the discipline part, which is just there's sort of a culture built up where it's part of the norm that you don't use marijuana, Carpenter said. I don't think there's going to be any pressure from the inside out, like commanders saying, let's go ahead and take marijuana off the list. I agree. It's going to be a taller order. I think it'll be veterans first, and then, maybe eventually they'll roll marijuana in, but they'll probably have harsh penalties if you're abusing it during operational hours. But the problem is that if you get called to do something, right, and you got to go, what happens if you're drinking? What happens if you're drunk, right? Alcohol's not off the table. And I'll tell you what, if you get super drunk and you have a long hangover period, you're out of commission for a long range of time. It might not be the same for marijuana for some people, Anyway, food for thought. Love to hear your comments. Have a great one. And remember, if we don't take care of each other, something went wrong.